And joining me in the studio to talk more about this is Tom Gross, who's an international affairs commentator. Tom, thank you very much for your time. So this resounding no vote has created an incredible mess for Theresa May. Tell us, is there any way out of it at all?
I don't think there is. I don't think there is by March 29th. We have 73 days until Britain may crash out of Europe. I think what we have to do is step back and look at why Britain's got such a weak negotiating hand. And it has a weak negotiating hand because from the very beginning, the government held a referendum that they didn't want to really hold, they didn't expect to lose, and they had no strategy for when they lost. And therefore, from the beginning, Britain has announced it's leaving the EU without having a proper negotiating strategy. So what can we do? I think that Britain needs to revoke Article 50, say that they're going to stay within the EU, but not take a remain position. From within the EU, they'll have a much stronger negotiating strategy, and they should try to get some of the other 27 EU countries also have doubts about the speed with which France, Germany, and Belgium, and some of the central players in the EU are moving forward. So it's like a divorce or something. If somebody walks out of the house, gives over their key, and then says, hey, we want to keep some of the furniture, too late.
Hard to come back in.
Yeah, Britain has to stay in the EU for the time being because you can't just stop Brexit. 17 million people are going to be outraged in Britain if they do. So you have to stop Brexit with a strategy for possibly eventually leaving if Britain doesn't get what it wants, but not just leaving overnight, staying in possibly for a couple of years to really put up a much stronger negotiating position.
And for the people at home, tell us some of the repercussions of Britain crashing out.
If Britain crashes out, there could be economic chaos. I mean, for several decades, everything in British life has been integrated. Social life, economic life, counter-terrorism, police, air transport, free flow of goods and trade and people. Without any provisions, if it just stops overnight, there could be delays of all kinds of goods, of parts, of people crossing borders and so on. British airlines may not be able to fly so easily and so on. And of course, there'll be ripple effects. For example, the Japanese Prime Minister was in Britain a couple of days ago because even Japan is worried about repercussions through Honda, which has a plant in Britain, repercussions for Honda back in Japan,
Certainly.
Which will affect the Japanese economy.
OK, and Tom, we heard Jeremy Corbyn just a short while ago tabling a no-confidence vote set for tomorrow for Theresa May. Let's take a little listen to some of what the opposition leader had to say.
I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
And Tom, this vote is, of course, scheduled for tomorrow. Tell us, what can we expect to come out of that?
Well, even though Theresa May had what I believe is the worst defeat in British democratic history today, that doesn't mean that all those MPs that voted against her deal will vote against her government tomorrow. So I would expect, because they don't want the possibility of a general election and a Corbyn government, that Corbyn's motion tomorrow will be defeated. But the clock is ticking towards a Corbyn government. And Corbyn, to be honest, is just interested in power, which is why he hasn't taken a coherent position on Brexit. He's just tried to undermine the government. And just to remind viewers, this isn't a normal, quote-unquote, opposition party. Corbyn is the most radical leader of any mainstream party in any democracy in the world. He looks to countries like Venezuela, which is in economic catastrophe for economic guidance. He has admired, on the past, he said he admired people like the East German dictator Erich Honecker. So we're talking about a possible revolutionary change of government were Corbyn to come in. And Corbyn is not actually that popular. He's riding a wave of popularity based on the incompetence of the Brexit process, which is why I mentioned before that the present government, the Conservative government, if it wants to stay in power, has to find some new strategy, which I suggested, of staying in the EU and then fighting from inside the EU to set up a really good exit strategy if needed for Britain, because otherwise the Theresa May government will probably get booted from power and Corbyn will come in with revolutionary economic and social policies.
Do you see any way back for Theresa May? Can she sort of scratch her way back?
Well, she's a survivor, and to be honest, I don't think anybody else actually wants her job right now because it's such a difficult task. There are many politicians circling around, waiting to see if they can seize power, but in spite of her weakness, it's a paradox, in spite of her weakness here, I think she will likely stay in power for some time to come.
And I know it's only just happened around an hour ago, but tell us, what sort of reactions are we hearing coming in from, other places in the world, international reactions, Tom?
Well, I think there's bemusement. Britain is the mother of democracies. It's an important place in the world. It ran 1/3 of the world only decades ago, the British Empire. Many people look to Britain and admire Britain, and they look to Britain as a stable country. If I can remind you, in the 20th century, many European democracies ended up having fascism or communism. Britain, almost alone, has never had, in modern times, revolution or extremism. So they're wondering why Britain is kind of imploding in on itself. It's total bemusement. And, just in a wider sense, for the West, we have uncertain, let's say, leadership under Donald Trump in America, and therefore it's very important that Europe, a democratic, powerful, coherent Europe is united to stop threats from China, Russia and so on.
That's right. And as you said, Britain is looked upon as, a pillar of strength, I guess. Do you think that this vote tonight weakens Britain?
Absolutely. First of all, Britain is divided as never before in my lifetime. Secondly, there's no immediate way out. Thirdly, people are very, very heated and very, very emotive, and they're various camps, and there's very little common ground. And as I just said, given the lack of leadership in the world, look at France. President Macron is very weak at the moment with all the yellow vest things, and Merkel in Germany is on the way out, and Germany may be entering a recession. So, and Trump's America is very divided. So it's very important that Britain maintain a place on the world, not just turn in on itself. And it could go on for months and years, this obsession with Brexit in Europe, and it can't and it plays into the hands of those who don't want a strong West, like China, like Russia, like Iran.
Well, there certainly is a lot at stake here. International affairs commentator Tom Gross, thank you so much for coming in and for your time. And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. But of course, we